Howdy folks, Shell Presto DiBaggio here. Awesome artist, remarkable writer, and undaunted luminary of my time. Today I've got a special treat. This video is part of a collaboration with a handful of other artistic YouTubers. We all did a piece of art based on Grimm's Fairy Tales. I'll have a link to a playlist at the end of this video and links to the collaborators' channels in the description. So if you're new here, we're glad to have you. And if you're a regular, well, you know I love a good book that's fallen into the public domain. You may have been expecting it, but here's the reveal. This video is one of my public domain redesigns. Grimm's Fairy Tales is near and dear to my heart. When I was in grade school, we had to take out a library book every week. I read fast, so if I got your usual thin children's book, I often read it before we even left the library. I also liked bizarre and supernatural things, so the huge, back-breaking hardcover of Grimm's Fairy Tales really appealed to me. So much that I sometimes had it checked out of the library 3 weeks of the month. You couldn't have a book out more than 2 weeks at a time, so I had to alternate. There are some great weird tales in Grimm's Fairy Tales. Between strange things happening like people transforming into animals or animals talking, and bizarre items that sound like they belong in a Dungeons & Dragons game, there's a lot to love. And the comeuppance for villains at the end of each story was usually gory in a way that really appeals to youngins just edging their way into the horror genre. Also, Nickelodeon had a Grimm's Fairy Tales TV show that actually covered more fairy tales than just the Brothers Grimm's. I loved the look and style of that show, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was in fact dubbed anime. So between that and Voltron, that Japanimation seed was quickly taking root in me. Anyway, picking a tale to illustrate was difficult indeed. And since I was diving into the public domain, it seemed natural to pick something that I could incorporate into the Ascension Epoch. I write and illustrate books set in the Ascension Epoch with my husband, for you fine folks who didn't know. It's an original universe of heroic adventure fiction that starts with the premise of H.G. Wells' Martians from War of the Worlds invading, and, well, you can imagine the world is pretty different after that. I originally thought of doing donkey cabbages because a transformation sequence seemed challenging and fun, and there's at least one magical item in that story that you'll eventually see in the Ascension Epoch. But an illustration focusing on that item would have been boring, and the transformation sequence had little to do with it. I just like adding my own spin on things. Newcomers here may not know that I like superheroes. A lot. And it always fascinated me when I was a kid that two Grimm's Fairy Tales always struck me as having superheroes in them before superheroes were really a thing. One was how six made their way in the world, and the other, the one I chose to, well, more run wild with than straight up illustrate, is either the Four Clever Brothers or the Four Skillful Brothers, depending on your translation. I can explain why what you're seeing me draw is radically different than the story, but let's have a little story time so you know where my inspirations come from. Here's the original The Four Skillful Brothers by the Brothers Grimm, courtesy of Project Gutenberg. "Dear children," said a poor man to his 4 sons, "I have nothing to give you. You must go out into the wide world and try your luck. Begin by learning some craft or another, and see how you can get on." So the 4 brothers took their walking sticks in their hands, and their little bundles on their shoulders, and after bidding their father goodbye, went all out at the gate together. When they had got on some way, they came to 4 crossways, each leading to a different country. Then the eldest said, "Here we must part, but this day 4 years we will come back to this spot, and in the meantime each must try what he can do for himself." So each brother went his way, and as the eldest was hastening on, a man met him, and asked him where he was going, and what he wanted. I am going to try my luck in the world, and should like to begin by learning some art or trade, answered he. Then, said the man, go with me, and I will teach you to become the cunningest thief that ever was. No, said the other, that is not an honest calling, and what can one look to earn by it in the end but the gallows? Oh, said the man, you need not fear the gallows, for I will only teach you to steal what will be fair game. I meddle with nothing but what no one else can get or care anything about, and where no one can find you out. So the young man agreed to follow his trade, and he soon showed himself so clever that nothing could escape him that he had once set his mind upon. The second brother also met a man who, when he found out what he was setting out upon, asked him what craft he meant to follow. I do not know yet, said he. Then come with me and be a stargazer. It is a noble art, for nothing can be hidden from you when once you understand the stars. The plan pleased him much, and he soon became such a skillful stargazer that when he had served out his time and wanted to leave his master, he gave him a glass and said, with this you can see all that is passing in the sky and on earth, and nothing can be hidden from you. The third brother met a huntsman, who took him with him, and taught him so well all that belonged to hunting, that he became very clever in the craft of the woods. And when he left his master, he gave him a bow, and said, whatever you shoot at with this bow, you will be sure to hit. The youngest brother likewise met a man, who asked him what he wished to do. Would not you like, said he, to be a tailor? Oh, no, said the young man. Sitting cross-legged from morning to night, working backwards and forwards with a needle and goose, will never suit me. Oh, answered the man, that is not my sort of tailoring. Come with me, and you will learn quite another kind of craft from that. Not knowing what better to do, he came into the plan, and learnt tailoring from the beginning. And when he left his master, he gave him a needle, and said, you can sew anything with this, be it as soft as an egg or as hard as steel, and the joint will be so fine that no seam will be seen. After the space of 4 years, at the time agreed upon, the 4 brothers met at the 4 crossroads, and having welcomed each other, set off toward their father's home, where they told him all that had happened to them, and how each had learned some craft. Then, one day, as they were sitting before the house under a very high tree, the father said, I should like to try what each of you can do in this way. So he looked up and said to the second son, at the top of this tree there is a finch's nest. Tell me how many eggs there are in it. The stargazer took his glass, looked up, and said, 5. Now, said the father to the eldest son, take away the eggs without letting the bird that is sitting upon them and hatching them know anything of what you are doing. So the cunning thief climbed up the tree and brought away to the father the 5 eggs from under the bird, and it never saw or felt what he was doing, but kept sitting on at its ease. Then the father took the eggs, and put 1 on each corner of the table, and the 5th in the middle, and said to the huntsman, cut all the eggs in 2 pieces at 1 shot. The huntsman took up his bow, and at 1 shot struck all the 5 eggs as his father wished. Now comes your turn, said he to the young tailor. Sew the eggs and the young birds in them together again, so neatly that the shot shall have done them no harm. Then the tailor took his needle and sewed the eggs as he was told. And when he had done, the thief was sent to take them back to the nest, and put them under the bird without its knowing it. Then she went on sitting, and hatched them, and in a few days they crawled out, and had only a little red streak across their necks where the tailor had sewn them together. Well done, sons, said the old man. You have made good use of your time, and learnt something worth knowing. But I am sure I do not know which ought to have the prize. Oh, that a time might soon come for you to turn your skill to some account. Not long after this there was a great bustle in the country, for the king's daughter had been carried off by a mighty dragon, and the king mourned over his loss day and night, and made it known that whoever brought her back to him should have her for a wife. Then the four brothers said to each other, "Here is a chance for us. Let us try what we can do." And they agreed to see whether they could not set the princess free. "I will soon find out where she is, however," said the stargazer, as he looked through his glass. And soon he cried out, "I see her afar off, sitting upon a rock in the sea, and I can spy the dragon close by, guarding her." Then he went to the king and asked for a ship for himself and his brothers, and they sailed together over the sea till they came to the right place. There they found the princess sitting, as the stargazer had said, on the rock, and the dragon was lying asleep with his head upon her lap. "I dare not shoot at him," said the huntsman, "for I should kill the beautiful young lady also." "Then I will try my skill," said the thief, and went and stole her away from under the dragon, so quietly and gently that the beast did not know it, but went on snoring. Then they hastened with her full of joy in their boat toward the ship. But soon came the dragon roaring behind them through the air, for he awoke and missed the princess. But when he got over the boat and wanted to pounce upon them and carry off the princess, the huntsman took up his bow and shot him straight through the heart so that he fell down dead. They were still not safe, for he was such a great beast that in his fall he overset the boat, and they had to swim in the open sea upon a few planks. So the tailor took his needle, and with a few large stitches put some of the planks together, and he sat down upon these, and sailed about, and gathered up all pieces of the boat, and then tacked them together so quickly that the boat was soon ready, and then they reached the ship, and got home safe. When they had brought home the princess to her father, there was great rejoicing, and he said to the four brothers, "One of you shall marry her, but you must settle amongst yourselves which it is to be." Then there arose a quarrel between them, and the stargazer said, "If I had not found the princess out, all your skill would have been of no use. Therefore she ought to be mine." "Your seeing would have been of no use," said the thief, "if I had not taken her away from the dragon. Therefore she ought to be mine." "No, she is mine," said the huntsman. "For if I had not killed the dragon, he would, after all, have torn you and the princess into pieces." "And if I had not sewn the boat together again," said the tailor, "you would all have been drowned. Therefore she is mine." Then the king put in a word and said, "Each of you is right, and as all cannot have the young lady, the best way is for neither of you to have her. For the truth is, there is somebody she likes a great deal better. But to make up for your loss, I will give each of you, as a reward for his skill, half a kingdom." So the brothers agreed that this plan would be much better than either quarreling or marrying a lady who had no mind to have them. And the king then gave to each half a kingdom, as he had said. And they lived very happily the rest of their days, and took good care of their father, and somebody took better care of the young lady than to let either the dragon or one of the craftsmen have her again. Okay, so there's the original story. A lot of versions have updated the huntsman's weapon to a rifle, by the way. So how does that relate back to this image with bombs going off and heavy artillery and a man projecting a ghostly image of himself? Mike and I create together. Sometimes one of us has an idea, and the other will have a light bulb go off and say, "This is perfect to add to that idea." And it turns into this wonderful amalgam of what we both created. I'd always liked the Taylor character for years, but never knew how to use him exactly. And Mike had written an idea for a character who could intuitively calculate the angles and firepower needed to hit distant objects with heavy artillery for our Martian War Chronicles stories set in the late 1800s. It immediately clicked when perusing Grimm's Fairy Tales that the tailor would make a fantastic medic in a war, and that the huntsman, well, if he had unfailing aim with a rifle, why couldn't he with any other weapon? Pair him with someone who could supernaturally see targets over mountains or hidden underground, like the Stargazer, and his already uncanny abilities would make his aim second to none. We decided to make the Stargazer a remote viewer instead of relying on a telescope, and have the tailor generate thread instead of relying on one magical item, because we wanted each man to be a talent, or have supernatural powers that were inherent to them. This dual pairing of supernaturally gifted huntsman and psychic remote viewer is what I focused on for this collaboration. I couldn't think of a single image that illustrated their abilities, so I went with a comic page to show a sequence. The British forces are trying to eliminate a freshly landed Martian cylinder before the tripods can emerge. One tripod has already come to herald and protect them. In panel 1, the remote viewer is noting how far off an initial test shot is. In panels 2 and 3, we see where he's physically sitting, and he's telling our reimagined huntsman how far off the target is. With lightning speed, the calculator reconfigures the angle in his head and informs the firing team. In the final panel, the Martians learn the deadly effect of this combination of odd fellows. You may have noticed I didn't mention my thoughts on the thief. Fear not, we have plans for the thief. Here are details of the reimagining, where these men are not related, but through the trials of war become a different kind of family. These are the Four Skillful Brothers-in-Arms. The Odd Fellows. Having fought alongside the French cadre extraordinaire in the Crimean War, the British military was quick to recognize the value of metahuman talents on the battlefield. Since 1858, the recruitment of known talents and the screening of existing ranks for the 6 martial potencies was a top priority for both the Army and the Navy. However, unlike the French, who deployed dedicated formations for their talents, British doctrine held that such men would best serve in their home regiments. It was assumed that this would obviate the need for a costly reorganization, as well as prevent the bifurcation of the army into rivalrous and uncooperative factions, a trend already seen in the French armies of the 1860s. Experience in the field, however, soon showed that this arrangement produced effects opposite of those intended. Officers of mixed units in the Second Anglo-Afghan War and the First Boer War reported strained unit cohesion caused by envy and superstitious fears toward talent soldiers by their comrades, as well as a concomitant lack of industry among the talents, who considered themselves too valuable to be employed in the often menial and monotonous tasks of soldiering. Additionally, battlefield necessity often required regimental commanders to detach individual talents from their platoons in order to best combine their abilities, leading to the de facto establishment of special formations anyway. Thus, the 1881 Childers Reform included the establishment of dedicated metahuman units, though typically still commanded by mundane officers, known as the Odic Auxiliary Formations. Odic was the common adjective for paranormal abilities at that time, a reference to the then prevailing Odic force theories of Baron Karl von Reichenbach, one of the early scientific investigators of psychic phenomena. These units would barrack, drill, and, in ideal circumstances, fight together. In the Army, these consisted of small units up to company size, suited to the standard role of infantry, cavalry, artillery, and engineers. The Royal Navy and Marines, meanwhile, would maintain their more ad hoc organizations. Of course, the term Odic Auxiliary Formations proved to be too much of a mouthful for even the most dutiful Tommy, and they were soon facetiously referred to as the Odd Fellows within the ranks. With the publication of Kipling's 1897 poem of the same name, the name became widely known outside the military as well. Concentrated at the Martian landing zones, the Oddfellows suffered dreadful casualties in the early stages of the invasion. The survivors, however, won renown throughout the war, with many attaching themselves to the signalman's guerrilla army and becoming the core of his talent forces. The most famous of this daring and gallant bunch were undoubtedly the Four Skillful Brothers-in-Arms. So called for the resemblance of their abilities to the eponymous Grimm's Fairy Tale characters, these four survivors of different Odic units were each drawn to the resistance forces led by Jameson Doyle, the signalman. Becoming close comrades with both the signalman and each other, their uncanny abilities gained a decisive advantage for the ragtag army in many engagements. Lieutenant Scott Winters, Royal Navy. Commander of the main turret on HMS Boanerges, a ram monitor and sister ship to the famed HMS Thunderchild, Winters possessed the little recognized and, at the time, even less valued talent of intuitive mathematics, or, as he was more commonly called, the lightning computer. What would have normally been deemed a curiosity, Winters proved to be of gigantic advantage in the calculation of artillery trajectories. With an accurate range to target and a precise reckoning of his ship's position, Winters could lay a broadside directly into the enemy's funnels on the first salvo. With less reliable information, his impeccable bracketing fire never failed to bring the shots home by the third salvo. And although less used than his artillery acumen, this same power made him a deadly marksman with a rifle. When he was combined with Thomas Collins, the second skillful brother, his already preternatural accuracy approached miraculous levels. Lance Bombardier Thomas Collins, 2nd Odic Auxiliary of Royal Artillery. Collins was a clairvoyant, specifically a remote viewer. Upon entering a relaxed state, he could astrally project himself upwards of 20 miles away. He used this ability to report on the exact location and disposition of the enemy. His unit wiped out at Horsell Common, he was one of the few survivors of the war's opening battle. Making his way toward London, he was eventually picked up by the HMS Boanerges, where he was partnered with Lieutenant Winters. When the pair joined the signalman's army shortly after the Battle of Gloucester, they went on to command the guerrilla band's sole mortar, Iron Bess. Dr. Charles Mortimer Trask, Royal Army Medical Corps. Trask was a skilled surgeon from a family of skilled surgeons who, against the warning of his father, joined the British Indian Army to, quote, seek a bit of adventure, end quote. Like most of his colleagues, he found the experience miserable and conditions at field hospitals appalling. He was not known to have any paranormal abilities until, while he was in the middle of surgery, his hospital came under fire by Malay rebels. Heedless that his assistant had been cut down by exploding shrapnel, he called for more thread to suture a hemorrhaging leg wound, and kept on sewing even without it. He had unconsciously called forth a stream of ectoplasm to serve in place of the thread. The ectoplasm did the job and then some, stimulating rapid, scar-free healing. With long hours of disciplined practice, Trask was accomplishing things thought impossible, especially in battlefield conditions. His patients survived what should have been mortal gunshots, and walked again on once severed legs. His fame attracted the attention of the Prince of Wales, who summoned him to London on the eve of the invasion. Originally scheduled to accompany the royal family during the evacuation to India, Trask adamantly refused, thinking it was a despicable and cowardly abandonment. Determined to face his death manfully in the capital, he was instead spared the worst of the Martian gas, and eventually joined up with the remnants of the army heading to Birmingham. Cut off by a second Martian force, he was saved by the signalman, whom he joined immediately. Private Harry Blair, 13th Odic Auxiliary. Before becoming an Oddfellow, Blair was a thief and a con man who used his powers of psychic deception to rob banks and jewelers in broad daylight, in full view of clerks and police. With concentration, he could cloud men's minds, dulling the perceptions and short-term memory of those around him, and creating convenient auditory and optical illusions to draw their attention away from him. After a string of brazen robberies that scandalized Scotland Yard and drew the ire of the Home Office, Blair was finally uncovered by none other than Sherlock Holmes. Blair should have faced decades of hard labor, but Sherlock's elder brother Mycroft had other plans. A conviction was averted in lieu of enlistment in the army, followed by attachment to the mysterious 13th Odic Auxiliary, a small unit unofficially and humorously known as the Queen's Own Skulldugers, who were often deployed on special assignment at the behest of the Diogenes Club. After the collapse of British resistance, Blair was personally assigned by the elder Holmes to, quote, look after, end quote, the signalman and the Promethean during the defense of the Leeds Arsenal. If you're wondering about that signalman fellow I kept mentioning, you can read his origin story in Martian War Chronicles Population of Loss, available on Amazon and other online booksellers. The Promethean appears in our book Copper Knights and Granite Men, and of course, he and the Four Skillful Brothers-in-Arms will make their way into future Martian War Chronicles books. But even though Book 2 is just around the corner, their appearances will still be a ways off. Alright, I hope you folks enjoyed that. My husband and I certainly had fun dreaming it all up. If you're wondering about the art supplies here, I did my rough sketches with the Hobby Lobby brand Master's Touch colored pencils, because they dissolve like crazy when you add water. That may be bad if you're trying to do a detailed painting, but it's great when you want your lines to go away. I essentially used them to lightly tint the paper. The first go of darker lines were a Prismacolor Colorase brown pencil, and I did the coloring with Arteza Real brush pens, which are also water-soluble and can give you some light watercolory effects. The final darkening of lines was with a Prismacolor regular colored pencil in sepia. And this was one heck of a drawing. I've never drawn heavy artillery guns before, and there was a lot of research that went into figuring out how things should look in these panels. I kept my recording of the first time I attempted this page, which went horribly wrong and had to be trashed, for a future sketch and chat. So subscribe if you want to see that fun. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you thought it was awesome, please share it on social media. And if you have any questions or comments about my art, the story, your favorite Grimm's Fairy Tale, or the Nick Jr. block of cartoons, add your 2 cents to the comments below. And if I seem like a cool cat to you, go check out my Subscribe Star or purchase an Ascension Epoch book. Alright, go check out that playlist for more Grimm's Fairy Tale goodness. My take was the most left field. At least 2 of the other YouTubers read the stories for you, so that's always fun. And the other videos run the gamut from kids' storybook-style illustration to nearly abstract, enchanting watercolor. Have an awesome day, folks. Presto, over and out. Speaking of fairy tales and Nick Jr. cartoons, did you know David the Gnome was like a book? And a very interesting book. It's not merely a storybook, it's sort of a tome on gnomes. And it's presented in a very interesting way, and the art is obviously fantastic. It's written by Will Hugan and illustrated by Ryan Porvalet, which I'm sure I really butchered because that sounds French, and I am not good at French. But this is one of my favorite art books because it's very interesting. it's not just a storybook, it actually like tries to tell you about gnomes. And it has these beautiful paintings. It says, for example, on this page, the gnome feels the responsibility to supply small rodents with food from his storage during the long, severe winter. And then there's sort of informational texts about what gnomes do and fun little illustrations to go along with them. For example, this one says, gnome children use the winged seeds of the maple to play at being dragonflies. And there's little maple seeds that the gnome children are playing with. There are stories as well. And there's quite a few of them in the back of the book here. All very beautifully illustrated. And there's even, really out of the ordinary things like the Song of the Troll and little bits and bobs of music in here that you can sing if you can inherently read notes, or you can try to play out on the piano. So I just thought that was pretty awesome, and I really loved the David the Gnome cartoon when I was a kid, so I was really surprised to find that there was this really interesting book that it was based on. And by the way, that cartoon still holds up today. I was quite surprised. Some cartoons don't. Alright folks, that's it from me. Presto, over and out.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.